Final Fantasy is by far and away one of my favorite game franchises of all time. While I didn't start playing the games until I was 13, the series quickly grew on me, and I've been an avid RPG fan ever since playing the original. Now, of course, some games are better than others, and today I shall list what I feel are the 10 best Final Fantasy games that I've played. Before the official list, I have to mention Final Fantasy X for the simple fact that it was a contender for the number 10 spot. Now, there may be a lot of people who are surprised or even angry that 10 doesn't place on a list of 10 games. However, the deciding factor ended up being a matter of gameplay. While I like 10 overall, it is the only game in the series that has something I absolutely cannot stand: Blitzball. Now, you might actually like the Blitzball minigame, and that's fine. I won't hate on you if you actually like it, but to me, it's an unnecessary interruption to the gameplay. What's worse, they actually force you to play 2 matches. Now, if you're one of those people who thinks I just need to get good at Blitzball, you can save it, because it doesn't really matter. Even if I was a Blitzball paragon, it wouldn't make me any less annoyed about having to take time away from slaying monsters and leveling up my party. In fact, I actually won both matches my first time ever playing the game. But the point is, it's tedious, it's not fun, and as I understand it, you have to keep coming back to play exhibition matches to unlock things for Waka. Additionally, you have to go around finding new people to recruit in order to make some sort of Blitzball dream team. And that kind of thing should be saved for sports games like Madden or NBA Live. Perhaps one day I'll find the gumption to go back and play all the way through the game, but in 3 attempts, having to play Blitzball drained away my enthusiasm each time, and each time I would fall away at or before the Thunder Plains. It's a real shame considering how great the game is overall. The graphics and music are great, the story seems interesting, if a little perplexing, and the characters are unique. But that's enough about Final Fantasy X. On to the list. This game's placement will likely rustle a lot of jimmies, especially when seeing some of the games I've placed above it, but I have my reasons. To start, Final Fantasy XV is a great game. The camaraderie Noctis and his friends share is entirely believable, and their banter is fantastic. The combat is straightforward, and you can go practice anytime you want. The graphics are top-notch, to be expected of the PS4, and along with a good soundtrack of its own, you can also purchase albums with music from older Final Fantasy games, which you can listen to in the Regalia or even on your portable music player. I would frequently play The Chase from Final Fantasy VII while speeding along the highway. The boss fights have an epic feel, and it's satisfying when you give them a Warp Strike final blow and rack up that experience. But for all this game does right, it does just as much wrong. For one, you're stuck with Noctis, Gladio, Ignis, and Prompto for the entire game. That's it. There aren't any other people who join the party, except as guests. Additionally, you can only control Noctis until you spend time grinding AP, so you can unlock the ability to control whichever character you want in the Ascension tree. I was particularly disappointed in not being able to create a party with Iris. She joins as a guest for a very brief time, which can only be extended if you sandbag on advancing the story. Another problem is the second half of the game. It feels rushed beyond explanation and is almost completely linear. Also, once you leave for Alticia, you can never come back to Lucis. That means if you haven't done every last side quest, you need to do them before entering the second half of the game. They try to get around this by letting you go back in time by talking to Umbra, but it just makes everything feel disjointed. In every other Final Fantasy game I've played, certain parts of the world might become inaccessible for a while due to story reasons, but generally by the end of the game, you can go anywhere you want, and the point of no return is much, much closer to the final battle. Speaking of which, I found Noctis' one-on-one fight with Arden very anticlimactic and unsatisfying, especially considering the narrative-based motivation you have for killing him. There's barely any strategy involved, it's just hit him until he stays down. Another problem is the story itself. Much of the context is hidden inside of DLC episodes, which is annoying to say the least. They're not essential to play and enjoy the main game, but in my opinion, story elements should be left out of DLC unless they're an entirely self-contained chapter, a la Mark of the Assassin and Legacy DLCs for Dragon Age 2. However, the game does not have Blitzball, so it rests comfortably above Final Fantasy X for that reason. This is the most obscure game out of the entire list. A lot of Final Fantasy fans might not even know about it. But back in 1992, Square developed a Final Fantasy game that was marketed as an RPG for entry-level players in an attempt to win over more American gamers with the RPG genre. Historically, the game failed on that front, and RPGs wouldn't find mainstream success and appreciation until Final Fantasy VII came along in 1997. It's gotten the reputation in some circles as being the worst Final Fantasy game, which is something I frankly don't get. In my opinion, that honor goes to Final Fantasy II. This was actually the second Final Fantasy game I ever played, right after the original. See, when I first got a look at Final Fantasy VII, it immediately piqued my interest. However, I didn't have a PlayStation yet and wouldn't get one until that Christmas. In the meantime, I found the original at a farmer's market and fell in love with it immediately. After I'd finished the game, my thirst for more Final Fantasy games grew deeper. My dad took me to Funko-Land, and I found a game called Final Fantasy MQ. I took it home and played it almost non-stop until I finished it. I found it to be a solid game. It was very different from the original while still keeping a lot of the same themes, like having to restore the light to 4 crystals and then face off against a great evil. One particular feature I liked was having the ability to set your companion to AI control in battle. As a geeky gamer teen without much of a social life, it gave me the feeling that I was playing the game with someone else. Or perhaps it just made the characters feel a little more real. Either way, it made the game a lot more enjoyable, and made battles go much faster. One thing I did find odd about the game is the level cap, 41. Even the original game had a level cap of 50, but for some reason, the programmers felt that 41 was high enough here. Also, your gear management is automated. If you obtain a stronger version of something you already have, the game automatically replaces the old gear with the new. This was likely done to cut down on micromanagement, which Square probably thought would be daunting to RPG newbies, but regardless, I would have preferred to maintain control over my inventory. This game's biggest downfall, however, lies in its potential to end before even getting started. The game starts you out in a battle against a behemoth. It's basically a slugfest until you kill it, since neither you nor it have any special attacks. This would be fine, except for the fact that if you miss too many times, and or the behemoth scores a critical hit, you won't survive the battle of attrition, and you'll get a game over without even having played 5 minutes. Despite this, I don't truly believe this game is deserving of all the hate it's gotten. To me, it's a worthy part of the franchise. Final Fantasy V was one of the games we didn't get in America until much later after its Japanese release. I played it as part of Final Fantasy Anthology released for the PlayStation, which I assume is the case for a lot of people. Having already played Final Fantasy Tactics at this point, I was happy to see another Final Fantasy title that included the job system. This kind of customization is something I love in video games, RPG or otherwise. The story doesn't seem as compelling in this one as in the others I've played, but you have so much fun playing around with job combinations it almost doesn't matter. Now admittedly, I haven't actually played 5 all the way through, so that's why I can't in good conscience put it above anything else on this list. However, suffice to say it has all the thematic charm you'd expect out of a Final Fantasy game. One day, I hope to get back to this one and play it further. I've heard that there are twists and turns in the story, along with a bit of tragedy, which it wouldn't quite be Final Fantasy without. Final Fantasy XII was also a game I never finished. I played what felt like a decent portion of the game, and then became distracted by something else. Honestly, I don't even remember where I was when I stopped, or what game pulled me away from it. However, I do remember having a lot of fun playing it. Grinding monsters actually felt rewarding. Additionally, the game employed a semi-open world format with enemies visible on the map. This was a drastic change to the random encounter formula the series was known for, but would become the standard for Final Fantasy games going forward, as 12, 13, and 15 all used the same style. This gave the player the opportunity to devise a strategy before engaging the enemy, since you generally always know what you're up against. The major gripe I have about this game is the license board system. Now, I get using a unique unlock system for character abilities and spells, etc., but making it so you have to unlock a license to use better gear is incredibly stupid. The way every other Final Fantasy game, and every other RPG I can remember at the moment, goes is like this. Find better weapon or armor, equip better weapon or armor. Not, find better weapon or armor, try and fail to equip it, check the license board, realize you need more LP, run around fighting enemies until you have enough LP, go back to the license board to unlock the license for the gear you found, and finally you can equip it. Now, granted, it's not a difficult system to use, and in my playstyle, I seldom found myself in a situation where I couldn't use a piece of equipment I just acquired, but the point is that it's completely unnecessary. Final Fantasy Tactics was a game I saw in Game Informer magazine and was immediately excited about after having played Final Fantasy VII thoroughly. Square ruled the 90s as far as RPGs were concerned, and I was intrigued that they were dipping their toe into the strategy genre. But I was most interested in the inclusion of the job system, something I experienced for the first time with this game, as I would not play 5 for several more years. The game has a medieval setting and religious overtones. I found the story a little difficult to follow in some places, but the game includes an index where you can read about the characters and other bits of lore, which I found very useful. I had a blast assembling a team of awesome characters and leveling them up, and unlocking new jobs. There are also many side elements to the game, like the ability to poach defeated monsters in order to buy unique items. There are also jobs you can send teams of your characters on to find treasures. The game has a lot to offer, and my longest playthrough was easily over 100 hours. One thing I disliked was the world map. Walking over paths between destinations was fine, but randomly being stopped on a battlefield you're trying to pass is rather jarring. I'd have much preferred the ability to traverse the map freely, and select the battlefield you want to fight on. Another disappointing aspect was having only 16 character slots for recruiting new team members, one of which is occupied by Ramza, the main character. There are numerous unique personalities you can invite to your cause, and by the end of the game you'll find yourself having to make difficult decisions about who to let go. Including Ramza, there are 12 unique characters, leaving only 4 slots for other characters. This limitation is compounded by the fact that the game includes monster breeding. This is an awesome feature in itself, but unless you're willing to compromise on recruiting unique characters, you likely won't get much out of it, especially if you have generic characters you're attached to. Otherwise, this is a terrific title, and probably one of the best strategy games ever made. Oh, and Cloud Strife is in it too. This game's placement above Final Fantasy Tactics was probably the closest between two titles on the main list. I truly could never pick one over the other, especially since they're such different games. However, without ever having played 7, I more than likely would have never played Tactics, so I gave the honor to Final Fantasy VII. But what can I say about Final Fantasy VII that hasn't been said already? It's probably the most polarizing game in the franchise. I've had people at both ends of the spectrum telling me how much they either love it or hate it. To some, it's one of the best games ever made, and to others, it's complete trash. Well, chalk me up a little closer to the lovers' end of the spectrum. This was the first game I owned on the PlayStation, and I played it non-stop over Christmas vacation '97. As someone who appreciates customization options in video games, I really loved the materia system. I would spend a lot of time moving materia around and trying to find the most optimal setup for my party. I became very attached to many of the musical tracks in the game, and I listen to them to this day. That's not to say the game is without its problems. For one, you have to play through Midgar before the game opens up and you get access to the world map. And then right after you leave Midgar, you're thrust into a long and unskippable set of flashbacks as Cloud recounts his past with Sephiroth. Additionally, while some monster sequences are incredibly awesome, the length of some of them borders on insane. Knights of the Round and Bahamut Zero are amazing to watch, but the novelty wears off the 20th time you see it, especially when you're in a tense boss battle situation. Lastly, and this is more of a personal issue than an issue with the game, but I was very disappointed that there was not a quest line in which you could revive Aerith. I fell for every single revive Aerith hoax that the internet offered up, and wasted so many hours trying them because I was that desperate to believe you could bring her back. Final Fantasy IV is the first of the series that is generally regarded as a gold standard RPG, and I don't disagree. It has every single thing you want in a traditional RPG. Memorable characters, a story that pulls you in and makes you care about those characters, epic monsters, an outstanding soundtrack, colorful, well-rendered graphics, and satisfying gameplay. I remember buying the SNES game at a farmer's market, and I spent all the next week playing through it. As has been described to death, Cecil's redemption story, in which he goes from a dark knight in the service of a corrupted king to a paladin who faces off against the ultimate evil, is among the greatest narratives in video game history. It drew upon the idea of class change from the first game, but instead of an upgrade, this was a reawakening of the spirit to throw off the influence of darkness and harness the powers of light. I'm a sucker for a well-written good guy, and Cecil Harvey is top tier. One other great aspect was having a 5-character party, something I've never seen repeated in the series. Some people might feel 5 characters is overkill, but it clearly hasn't detracted from the legacy of this game. Now, as legendary as this game is, I do have some gripes. First off, you have the familiar theme of 4 crystals and an evil entity to fight against. However, when you reach the climax of this arc, the game says, surprise! There's an underworld with dwarves and, oh yeah, 4 more crystals. It's probably the biggest example of having the rug pulled out from under you, narratively speaking, that I've experienced in a game. The second problem is the difficulty spike on the moon. You might think you're untouchable once you're close to the end of the game, but boy, strap yourself in for the moon. You'd better dig in and prepare for a grind because the moon doesn't mess around. You'll have flans coming at you from every direction, and you'll be wondering how endgame characters can feel so ineffective. Now, you can overcome this through careful and steady level grinding, which is why the obstacles on the moon ultimately did not prevent me from finishing the game. But, take heed, the moon is not for the faint of heart. That's right, the granddaddy of all Final Fantasy games, I place the original at number 3. Aside from being the company-saving hit that started one of the biggest game franchises on Earth, it was the second RPG game I ever played, the first being Phantasy Star 3 for the Sega Genesis. I was immediately fascinated by the ability to create your own adventuring party from 6 different classes. I had hours of fun trying out different combinations before settling on a fighter, red mage, white mage, and black mage, and this was the party I used when I first beat the game. While Phantasy Star 3 was a fun game, it was Final Fantasy that turned me into a die-hard RPG fan. Fighting monsters and leveling your party is a genuinely fun experience, and the animation on the characters' weapons and spells are satisfying to watch. And while the story lacks the depth of future installments, the themes of heroes, crystals, fiends, and magic persist throughout the series. The visuals are impressive for 8-bit, and the tradition of fantastic music in Final Fantasy games started here as well. As early as the opening screen, you're treated to the timeless theme of Final Fantasy, and it beckons you to press the start button. No classic is without its problems, however, and Final Fantasy does have a few. The biggest and most glaring issue is a lack of redirection on attacks against defeated enemies. If two characters attack the same enemy and the first character slays it, the second character will attack the empty space where the enemy used to be, resulting in an attack that is ineffective. Another problem is buying items. You have to buy them one at a time. So if you want to stock up to 99 heal potions, you'll have to cycle that store menu 99 times. In light of these flaws, the game is remarkably fun to play, and I'd throw it on and play it any day. Some people might be upset to see Final Fantasy IX placed above Final Fantasy IV in my overall ranking, but I have to be true to myself. After experiencing the futuristic and techie themes of Final Fantasy VII and VIII, I found it refreshing to play Final Fantasy IX, which took the franchise further back to its roots. With Steiner, Zidane, Garnet, and Vivi, you have the classic fighter, thief, white mage, black mage setup, which is the recommended party composition of the original Final Fantasy. That's right, you get to have a 4-character party again, which we haven't had since Final Fantasy VI. Unlike those included in other Final Fantasy games, the mini-games are not tedious. Catching frogs with Quina, digging for treasure with your chocobo, and Tetramaster are all actually fun to play. The music is exceptional, even by Final Fantasy standards, and I can't think of a single track in this game that's forgettable. The graphics are refined and have a soft, whimsical feel, shedding the choppy and polygonal look of the previous PlayStation installments. I honestly can't say anything negative about this game, which is why I rate it so highly. This is probably the least original choice for the number 1 spot on a list like this, but I'd be lying to myself if I said any differently. What can you say about Final Fantasy VI? It's simply amazing. It's one of the few Final Fantasy games for which I can definitively say I have a favorite character, Sabin. I always loved his claw weapons and blitz attacks. Aside from Sabin, the game has a colorful and memorable cast of characters, all with their own unique powers and abilities. Additionally, every character, with the exception of perhaps 2, has their own story, and the game affords you the opportunity to experience them all. After a cataclysm at the midpoint of the game, you have to go around the world finding your lost and scattered friends. Getting the whole crew back together is a triumphant feeling, and you will experience the full gamut of emotions as you go through the not-so-straightforward process of finding everyone. Speaking of characters, this was the first game in the series that let you swap out characters to make your own party from a large roster of heroes. Prior to Final Fantasy VI, you were stuck with whomever the game gave you. Now, this wasn't necessarily a bad thing, since all the games have outstanding characters, but it was very novel to have the freedom to build your party the way you want. But what truly sets it above the original for me is the depth of the story. The game is an emotional roller coaster from start to finish. You're drawn in by Terra and her struggle with finding her place in the world, and there are surprises around every corner, with enemies who become friends, and friends who will always be remembered. Along with legendary music, epic boss battles, and fulfilling gameplay, Final Fantasy VI satisfies on all fronts, and I can say without reservation, it is the best Final Fantasy game ever made. That will do it for this chapter. Thank you for checking out my channel. If you like my content, please tell me in the comments below, or if you have any general feedback, I'd welcome that as well. Make sure you subscribe so that you're always up to date with all of my latest gaming adventures.